All right, a very good morning, everyone. Thank you so much to our MC for that very warm welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, do realize that we are in and out as it's a rolling coffee break, but let's get started nevertheless. I have a very esteemed panel of speakers with me. A very good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, we gather today at a time when leadership cannot be defined by job titles or polished resumes alone. So around the world, we are also here to discuss the serious polycrises: climate disruption, entrenched inequality, shrinking civic space. So all of these are indicators of the limits of conventional leadership models which are built on hierarchy, control, narrow metrics of success. Now in philanthropy, the risk is even sharper. If we only back leaders who look, sound, and think like the ones we've always known, we're guaranteed to have the same outcomes we've always had. Meanwhile, though the data is clear, diverse leadership teams are more innovative and more effective. Yet women, indigenous leaders, youth, and those outside of elite networks remain underrepresented in decision-making rooms and also underfunded in grant portfolios. This conversation will be asking, what does it take, not just for individuals to lead differently, but for entire institutions to model a leadership architecture which is rooted in equity, care, and shared power? We'll also be asking, how do we create systems that not only tolerate risk and failure, but see them as pathways to breakthrough solutions? Our panel brings a unique vantage point on these exact challenges, from reimagining corporate governance at Khazanah Nasional to building one of the world's largest community development organizations at BRAC, to reshaping national policy at Pantau Madani, and also bridging healthcare and investment through NineYards Ventures. Together, ladies and gentlemen, they represent a spectrum of leadership which is forged in complexity, grounded in lived experience, and also committed to shifting power towards communities. So let's cut to the heart of it. What will it take for philanthropy not only to fund change makers, but to perhaps embody that change itself? Nash, Khalid, Nadiah, and Asif. So I've got one rapid fire question just to get the engine going, all right? Perhaps if I could begin with Nash. So, in under a minute, what does the term unconventional leadership mean to you?
Well, under a minute, unconventional leadership means, to me, if I were to summarize it, it's if a conventional leader, when he sees a proven path, the person will say, follow me. An unconventional leader, when he sees a path, he says, let's find a better path and work with me. So I think unconventional leader means someone who's able to lead out of the norm, lead out of what is normally expected, and most importantly, the ability to listen, empathy. I think that's unconventional leadership for me, at least in less than a minute.
Listening. Yes, philanthropy that listens, that's also our theme, well said. Nadiah, could I move to you? What has the term unconventional leadership meant for you?
I think it's a lot about cross-pollination and bringing a lot of people and resources together. So just a bit of background. So I think I've spent my last decade, I just turned 40 last year, but I spent my last decade being a CEO of a listed healthcare company, had a very public stratospheric rise and meteoric fall and everything in between. But for me, I think leadership is really fundamentally about looking at things differently and trying to solve larger problems together and bring resources from unconventional places so that we can work together on the problems that we see.
Bringing together an entire library and wealth of experience. Thank you, Nadiah. Khalid, may I ask you, what has the term unconventional leadership meant for you, particularly in this current role that you hold at Pantau Madani?
Thank you, Tehmina. Firstly, let me say it's such a delight to be here. Truly amazing to share this platform and this floor with such inspiring individuals. Thank you, Yayasan Hasanah. I think for me, unconventional leadership simply means when you actually cannot ignore what needs to be done. That gives rise to unconventional leadership. And the outcome of not acting is is an outcome which you not only cannot accept, but it's unthinkable to you. That gives rise to unconventional leadership. And myself and Asif, we were just talking on the sidelines here. And also the question about adaptability and flexibility, having individuals work in various sectors. You know, just relating to my personal experience coming from the corporate sector into the government, I think we should have more leaders being able to cross-shift between the public sector and the private sector, simply because there is a dying need today to bring collective strengths together, and you need leadership to drive that, and understanding what is really required to lead in the public sector and what is really required to lead in the private sector.
Context really is everything, isn't it? Yeah. Especially in this day and age. Asif, may I move to asking you, what has the term unconventional leadership meant in your lens?
Thank you. And I would start with a quote from Gandhi, who used to say that, "There goes my people, I must follow them." Right? So I think one of the, whether it's conventional or unconventional, I think any core leader must be able to follow, listen, and understand the dreams and aspirations of its people, right? So I think being a good listener and understanding and empathy is the core of it. The second thing I would say is that has to be more entrepreneurial, risk taker, and be able to be bold in ambition, you know, big ambitions. And of course, that needs to be coupled with what I call the impatient optimism, right? So you need to have that urgency that all these things has to be done. And so it needs to be done in a, so you need to do whatever it takes to do that in a way which is meaningful. And the last thing I would say that's more important, I think was our other panelists attributed to that, is that in today's world, it's so important to be able to navigate different streams. You cannot just be a public sector leader and not understand private sector and be able to talk to them. You cannot just be a social sector leader and be able to just be completely oblivious to the politics around. So being able to have conversations in the language that the different sectors understand. So being a generalist is more important than ever, so that you can address these complex situations that we are all trying to figure out with each other.
Thank you. Fascinating perspective, Asif. So yes, absolutely. Being a generalist, but also perhaps coming from your specific area of expertise. And that either results in a healthier ecosystem or a morass where everything is so interconnected it can sometimes become more difficult to navigate. But before we dig deeper, and of course going back into geopolitical shifts and centering communities, I'd just like to issue a quick reminder to everyone. We hope to be able to take a couple of questions from the floor. The Slido code is on the screen. Please do scan it, put in your questions, and in particular, you can also then proceed to upvote them, and I will pick the ones that come up at the top of the list. Right, so moving firmly into the discussion itself, this one specifically for Asif perhaps. Now, speaking about centering communities and geopolitical shifts in particular, 2025 has been a year like no other. We keep speaking of unprecedented times. I'm sure we're ready for precedented ones, but that doesn't seem to be on the table anymore. So you've been leading BRAC, an organization that has pivoted several times since its founding in the 70s to address all these pressing issues. So what lessons would you like to share with all of us here at the Hasanah Forum about keeping the impacted communities at the heart of the work that you do, while also enabling them to have community leadership during these specific times?
Thank you so much. And this is a great question. And like you said, that I mean, I took over as the CEO. I've been with BRAC for about 15 years, took over as the CEO about 2019, end of 2019. And every year since then has been unprecedented, because then COVID started in 2020. Then there's Ukraine crisis and all of that. So this is the reality now, essentially, that there is not, one year is not going to be the same as the previous year. And I think we just have to live with this. And so being able to navigate these situations, I think you need to have your North Star, right? So I mean, a lot of people, I mean, for others who may not be so familiar with BRAC, it's an organization that started as a relief organization about 52 years ago in Bangladesh to support the refugees who are returning back from India and trying to find their livelihoods. But then very soon we realized that people need long-term livelihood very quickly, and if you want to get them out of poverty, poverty is very much multidimensional. So you got to address a lot of these issues like healthcare, education, access to finance. So BRAC grew trying to solve some of these problems because government could not solve those problems for them, because government never could reach that last mile. And in most of the resource-constrained countries, that's the reality. The last mile has to be a lot of times delivered by social organizations like ours. So BRAC's, but over time, over the last 52 years, being able to solve some of these problems at scale. Now, BRAC is one of the largest organizations, NGOs in the world, which not only has large-scale programs and works not just in Bangladesh, but in Asia and Africa and 14 countries, but it also has a lot of these social enterprises that actually works with people in the margins, at the same time provides the financial diversity that we need. So we have close to almost 100,000 staff, but at the same time, the family of BRAC has a huge amount of community leaders as well. But the North Star for us also always been that you need to solve problems. You need to be a solution provider to social challenges. Our founder used to say that as a social organization, if we cannot solve the changing problems of the society, because society is also not static, society is changing, and so you need to have that DNA within the organization and the culture to be able to understand those changing problems and be able to work with the community to solve them. So I think, and that done with the ambition and boldness that I was referring to, I think has led us to the scale that we operate in. But I think going back to the question of what lessons, lessons are that you can be big, but you have to be agile, right? At the same time, going back to, I think one of our panelists yesterday was saying that it's really, really important that the narrative of development that has been there for the longest time, which was always about success stories, which was always about that, oh, look, stories and I think, but yeah, which are happy with how people's lives have changed and all of that. But we know that that's not the reality. Development is complex. Development takes not only community at the center, but it has to deal with politics, it has to deal with finance, it has to deal with a lot of other realities, particularly when you are in the business of changing people's behavior, when you want to change their negative cultural taboos to something positive. I mean, for example, Bangladeshi girls never used to go to school, that there was whole culture was shifted. And that required a lot of work and keeping, but I would say that keeping women at the center of all of our work has been always a biggest game changer, because our founder used to say women are the best managers of poverty, so they're always the best managers of development. So that was very, very important.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Asif, because clearly when you speak about women, it's not a side narrative. As 50% of any population globally, that obviously means if you're leaving them behind, you're leaving behind half the sky, as proverbs go. Moving quickly on, Nash. So I'd like to focus on, of course, the Malaysian experience in looking at spurring growth, creating value for the local economy. Yep. And of course, with your work via Khazanah, you're looking at building capacity as well as vibrant communities. What can you share with us about some of the stories and the learning which have come out via not just Yayasan Hasanah, even K-Youth, that helped to shape this picture for us here in Malaysia?
Thank you, Tina. As you know, Khazanah actually has a dual mandate as an organization. You've got the commercial side and you have the nation building and societal side. So in a way, we try to do good for the country at the same time to give dividends to our shareholders. It is a tough balancing act, but someone has to do it. Our societal value, the way we deliver it is through our affiliates. You have Yayasan Hasanah, Think City, Khazanah Research Institute, Taman Tugu. Yep. So these are the affiliates. And the things that we do actually has a significant impact in terms of to the people, to the country, and to Khazanah as well. I think this also linked to unconventional leadership as well. I'll give you an example. We are now working on a major project under Yayasan KL. For example, the revitalization of Bangunan Sultan Samad, Kaoosji Srinegara. I mean, if you look at sovereign wealth funds per se, I don't think they actually focus on that. Not many sovereign wealth funds in the world actually has such a complex mandate like us. But again, it comes back to the earlier statement, which is someone has to do it. And why we have to do it? Because we need to deliver societal value to the people, to the rakyat, which is also aligned to the Madani framework as well in terms of raising the floor. At the same time, we also have to raise the ceiling. So we do, for example, have initiative to help the VC ecosystem, the venture capital ecosystem, for example, under our Dana Impact. Also under Jelawan Capital to come up with new fund, local fund managed to strengthen them as well. So those are the kind of things that we do, which is very unique from my experience. But what I can say is, regardless of what the comments may be on what we do, I think the sense of fulfillment is great, right? That for me as a person, as an individual, that drives me to go to work on a daily basis. You want to wake up, you want to do something which basically serves a purpose, right? So as an organization, as an individual, I think that's very important. And that's one of the unconventional way of leadership to me.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for sharing that. Because, of course, when it comes to locally led projects, they not only give, I think, the steering organizations a satisfaction, but then you see the communities able to not just take ownership, but then very quickly you can replicate that little test tube project across the country as well. Because that is what really matters, being able to scale and ensure that the scope does not leave behind anyone. Because quite often what happens is we start in urban hubs, and who gets left behind is everybody who is on non-urban margins, right? So fantastic way to also segue into asking Khalid a really important question when it comes to the work that you've been doing, combining both government as well as the private sector. So how can philanthropic institutions more effectively align with national policy initiatives, such as what Unit Pantau Madani is doing, in particular to look at a really deep intersection, which is systemic educational reform, at a time when we're both seeing a large number of young Malaysians, even before they reach SPM or high school certification level, drop out and not take those exams, not because they don't want to study, but because the urgency to earn a living via gig work, etc., becomes more important.
Thank you. Firstly, I would say I was very delighted to hear Dato Nash referring to the Madani economic framework in his explanation. That tells me that it's quite deeply rooted in what we are doing. I think this whole intersection between developing solutions and aligning to national priorities sometimes doesn't take as center stage as it should. Just from my experience in being both in the private sector and in the public sector, I think my personal view is that we don't spend enough, the public sector don't spend enough time with the private sector, and the private sector don't spend enough time with the public sector, right? Somehow or other, there is this sort of divide that, you know, we are all sitting in sort of different fences, and one is a regulator and one is an implementer kind of thing. And given where we are moving with all these challenges and complexity, we definitely need to come as one team, right? The public sector and the private sector, to unlock the potential that sits in between. Now, I think the more important thing is that philanthropic efforts and institutions actually has the potential to be game changers, especially when it comes to issues like education reform, but only if the efforts are deep-rooted and aligned to national agenda priorities, right? Because then it becomes very seamless, and it's not competing in any nature, but it becomes very, very complementary to what the agenda, development agenda of the government is, right? So the private sector needs to work, hand in glove with the government, and in Malaysia, we have a very clear Madani economic framework that guides our focus, our priority, and sort of is our North Star in where really we want to take the economy moving forward. So engaging early with ministries, agencies, etc., in designing policies is so important, because to me it's not only a question of aligning, but it's a question of co-developing the solutions together, right? From the very onset of it means that policymakers, practitioners, institution, private sector, social impact institutions, philanthropic efforts, etc., all need to sit together to work on developing these solutions. Now, a very real practical example of this is what you mentioned actually in the education sector, where if you see the board outside, we have this program, Anak Kita, right? And this was a program where we brought in the efforts of the whole of nation, not only the whole of government, but we brought in the efforts of the whole of nation. So that program is actually aimed at solving a couple of issues, one being the 3M numeracy literacy issues, the Malaysian Education Certificate, the SPM students, to uplift them, and thirdly is what we call as dropouts, right? Student dropouts out of our schools, and how to bring them back to schools. So at the very and this program was spearheaded by both the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Finance. Then we have Yayasan Hasanah leading the implementation with all civil society organizations. Then we also brought in the public universities. Then in designing the program, we also brought in World Bank, UNESCO, UNICEF. We syndicated with all of them. And then we also brought in the tech companies, Google's, etc., right? So it's really a whole of nation approach to look at how can we harness the potential of all actors, not only in implementation stage, but in co-designing stage, right? Together with the government. And Alhamdulillah, I think the program we started the program, we launched the program in October last year. We now have the first set of data, and the program is already showing some fantastic results, right? That program will touch 83,000 students across 2,000 over schools across Malaysia. The 3M program will touch 7 states, SPM program all states. And why only 7 states? Is because the data led us to the 7 states. We wanted to make sure that the program is so targeted that we know every student that is sitting in one kampung, Sungai Tiang in Perak. We have 5, 6, 7, 10 students there that need the right intervention, and so that we can really, really target the students. So, for example, when we did the SPM, Pecotan SPM program in 2024, we broke them down into 3 categories. The first category being those who just passed the trial exams. Right? We took the trial exams, just passed the trial exams to make sure that when they sit for SPM, they can flow through and get their SPM certificate. Then we took them that actually failed the trial exams, because you need two subjects that are compulsory, right, that fail. And we made them go through the intervention. And out of that, we found that 83% out of those students actually managed to get their SPM certificates. These were students that failed their trial exams. Then we took students that never even attended the exam. They didn't even turn up for the exam, right? And so we went to those students, because when you don't turn up for the exam, means you have lost hope. There's no more motivation. You think that by sitting the exam, you're going to fail. So why rock up and come to the exam? And the key thing we did that with the intervention is to give them the hope that there is light at the tunnel, and we are here in together, and we are here to help you. And we went through all the social, emotional coaching with the students, the right interventions with the students. And at the end of the day, 51% of those students actually not only ended up sitting for the exam, but they managed to pass and get their certificate, right? So this is an example of how if you bring in all parties together in co-developing the solutions, then you can actually have quite magical results at the end of the day. And I would really encourage more organizations to do that. Sit down with government agencies early on, work together very closely in developing the solutions, and not only come in when you have already cleared intervention plans, but on the onset think about co-designing the solutions, because coming back to the theme, right, it's philanthropy that listens, and I think from a government perspective that's exactly what we need to do more, listen, and all parties effectively also need to do that to champion the social impact for every single child in the country.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Khalid, for sharing that. 83,000 students in Malaysia and around from 7 states. I think that really deserves not just acknowledgement, but also understanding that this is how quickly you can scale within just one cohort. If you listen and if you also look at data sharing across dashboards too. Nadiah, I'd like you to move perhaps a little deeper into what you touched upon briefly earlier. So your strengths and your history is built along leading, mentoring, and also now coaching leaders across sectors. Tell us a little more about what areas you've been a little more exposed to recently and how that has helped to shape your perspective too about unconventional leadership.
I think today, if there was one message that I would like to leave behind, is that leadership is human-centered. I mean, we're leading people, we're not leading robots. And I think it's really important, all those conversations we've had these past 2 days about the value of lived experience having a seat at the table. So one of the things that I'm working on with the National AI Office is we were discussing, one big question was, how do we make the market for AI in Malaysia? Right? We are basically capitalist. We want a lot of new companies to pop up. Some of them may fail. But then there is an issue of inequity of access. Like, for example, should access to tokens for AI models be made a public good so that we can ensure that everyone has access? What about the humanities and the arts? Because what are these models being trained on? A lot of the LLMs that are being released right now in Malaysia, what we call sovereign models, are being trained on Malay dialects, for example. But if we don't have the content creators, then in the future, what will these models then be feeding on? But you know what? There was no civil society reps at the table, and I don't know why, because the AI advisory was actually open to participation for all. So maybe the question we should be asking was, did you not see yourselves as being valid sitting at that table? And what we can do to actually change that. I used to run hospitals, and in hospitals, we employ, 80% of our workforce is female because of the nurses. And many of them, majority of them, are below 30. And the kinds of problems that you have to deal with as a CEO, it's not just about, what's your bill size and all that. But, with these cohort of people, we were facing social issues, domestic violence, because these nurses are working on shifts, they're married, they have kids, sexual harassment at work, bullying because of the extreme peer difference between nurses and specialist doctors, financial literacy. I'm not sure many of you realize, but there are many money lenders and alongs actually hanging out in the emergency departments of private hospitals, not for the patients, but actually for the nurses who are working there. There are daughters and wives who are being depended upon to finance their family. Many of them leave to work in Saudi because they have to pay off these debts. Childcare, housing, this problem sound familiar to you. Many of you are working on this. And I myself must admit that us in private sector, we did a very bad job of not extending a hand across the aisle to ask for help on these issues with all of you. But at the same time, I really think that we should be building some sort of way to bridge this gap. And increasingly, I'm facing a career transition myself, and I think it's really important. What really resonated with me, what Khalid and Gabriel said earlier, how do we build this highway or facilitate this travel of people and expertise between private sector, public sector, and the civil society? Because there's going to be a lot of displacements that are going to happen because of technology or geopolitics or whatever it is. And perhaps each of us, our sectors can be a bit of a refuge for each other. If we're sick of corporate and we want to do something different, we should be able to go and contribute our skills in the civil society and then maybe later come back. But I'm afraid I sense there's a little bit of discrimination, I don't know, or sort of suspicion sometimes about how civil society and corporate or public sector view each other. And so I think at the end of the day, what I really come away from this conference is how do we consistently include diverse voices at discussions in business and policy and maybe we need a 30% club to make sure that we always have lived experience in civil society at the table. So yeah, I'm interested to hear the audience's thoughts on this. I'm all very new, but this is just my observation as an outsider.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Nadiah. I love the fact that you touched on a couple of different areas, in particular AI. Now, of course, the speed at which AI is evolving, especially agentic AI, every 7 months, it updates itself, much faster than the speed that was anticipated, which would be at least a year to 18 months. And honestly, the bottled water that we all drink has more regulations governing it than AI does currently, even though it's impacting the entire infrastructure of society, the way we think, how we consume, and industries too. So very important points there. Thank you, Nadiah, for highlighting. So that brings us to the end of the first round of questions. We've got another round to go through. Let's pick up the pace a little. Asif, coming back to the work that you do at BRAC, looking at leadership evolution amid aid cuts and fiscal pressure. So this is, of course, an unescapable reality today, especially towards Q3 of 2025. Severe cuts to global aid funding, increasing pressures on national budgets, which means that the philanthropic sector is being more and more squeezed. So given these challenges, how do the leaders of today and tomorrow need to show up quite differently from how leaders used to?
I'll maybe just talk about how I am changing the way things are from the status quo. I mean, I think essentially there are a couple of things. I mean, one is that not only the context is changing, right? I mean, because we know that the aid cuts and these things are happening. I mean, I can go on about why the development sector needed to be disrupted in the first place. But I think some level of disruption was needed. So in a way, it's not necessarily a completely bad thing. Maybe I can take this. Yeah, thank you. Maybe it's not completely a bad thing that aid cuts have happened, because I think I may be controversial, but I think there were a lot of inefficiencies in that sector, and we know a lot of us who worked closely on the ground, we had talked about this, how it was just compliance focused, not so much impact focused, how development needed to be done differently. Anyway, I'm not going to go into that, but what has changed over the last and how leaders need to show up, I mean, based on my context, I would say that there is, I'm now, for example, not just talking to my civil society echo chamber. I am talking to politicians more actively. I'm talking to business people more actively, trying to understand how they view us and where is this distrust that Nadiah is talking about. It is true that politicians don't trust civil society leaders, at least in Bangladesh, and vice versa. And there's this mass sort of stereotyping of the entire group of people that, oh, politicians are like this, civil society people like this, bureaucrats are, without really trying to understand the vantage point where each of these people are coming through. So it's going to be, if we are trying to build a coalition of some of these wicked problems that are around us, I mean, then we need all of us to work together, and that trust needs to be built, and that's only going to come when you really truly understand each other's pain points. So the other thing that's I'm doing more is that how do we kind of, not only it's a national partnership, but you know, we talked about community ownership and stuff, our North Star, so that's a given, right? But at the same time, globally we are all connected more than ever. So what's happening, the scientific innovations that are coming up in, say, MIT or in the global North, how do I kind of marry that to solve some of the ground truth and to solve some of the problems in Bangladesh? I'll just give you one example. Like, so MIT came to us and they said that we are doing very sophisticated weather data analysis that we can do for Bangladesh for the next 30 years that can forecast about what the climate pattern is going to come in. But what we don't have is that, okay, who's going to talk to the people and who's going to make them understand what it means for them and how they can plan it. So I think, and that's where we came in. So we started working with the community, make them understand how weather patterns are changing and how they need to change what the crops they're cultivating or what kind of insurance that you should get. So in a sense, in a way, it's a best of both worlds where, you know, best of science can then get embedded into what's actually useful for the community. The other thing I would say that I think in a sense going back to on the financing side, I think we just have to also understand that financing, the era of grant-driven financing is over, right? So how do we kind of diversify and understand different types of financing better is going to be more important. So that's working with whether it's government financing, whether it's loan financing, whether it's credit guarantee. So that's something I think we are having to do more. And the last bit is the intergenerational bit. I sense that there's so much tension across the society between generations now. Whether it's in my workforce, whether it's basically in the chattering class, that's something that needs to, we're trying to do more about intergenerational conversation. It's not about just poo-pooing I mean, Gen Z basically saying no to everything that past generation have done, and vice versa, that older generation, the Gen X's, or they're saying that, oh, Gen Z doesn't understand this and that, they're so arrogant, they feel like they know everything. So there is a lot of these tension. I think there needs to be coming at some point. This is also a bit of unprecedented because the kind of technology changes that has happened over the last 10 to 12 years, the gaps between has caused the gaps between generations in many folds compared to any other generations in the past. So that's something I'm doing a lot more proactively. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that, Asif. Now, definitely, pivoting to hybrid funding models is clearly the path towards survival, as funding cuts are only going to increase. And of course, intergenerational leadership, looking for points of empathy, perhaps, is really critical, as some workplaces have even up to 3 to 4 generations present amongst ourselves. Thank you. Nash, moving deeper into looking at Khazanah's dual role, which is, of course, delivering financial returns while also advancing national development. Tell us about how more and more Khazanah is also very much rational about how it takes unconventional leadership to balance this boat well.
Yeah, hi. So as I mentioned earlier, we have a dual mandate. Obviously, on the societal side, we go through our delivery partners like YH and so forth. I think in terms of making a difference, that's basically the objective that we have. How do we make a difference for society, for the country? I'll touch a bit on the grant, for example, which is basically the bulk for business. Actually, the operations of YH is basically the grant making. I think when it comes to grant, it's not about deployment. It's about deploying it to those who really need it. And how do you do it to make it easier for those who really need to get a grant? Because I'll give you an example. Some people are a bit shy to apply. If the process of giving grants, for example, is so complicated, a lot of people are even fearful of even applying. Right? So that is what we experience at YH. I don't know about other foundation who has that sort of problem. So for us, I think we do want to make access to grant easy and impactful as well. Now, in terms of impactful, how do you measure impact? I think in one of the sessions yesterday we were talking about how do you measure impact. Impact is important as well, because you can talk all day about helping this, helping that, helping the social enterprise, whatever, but how do you measure the impact? Right? We need to know that so that we can improve ourselves better. That's one. Secondly is, I think we do need to be a bit more mindful, listen more to what the issues are on the ground, right? Sometimes people claim that Khazanah, for example, we are up there on the ivory tower, not really understanding the ground, and going down in trying to help people. Actually, when you help people, you're helping them the wrong way if you don't understand what the issues are. Right, so we do that through YH, and I'm glad, I'm so proud of my team at Yayasan Hasanah. under city. I think they've done such a wonderful job. But I think the message is, how do we improve ourselves? How do we do things better? So that is something that is work in progress for the team. I think on the other part of Khazanah as well, as I mentioned earlier, we do work on the heritage cultural part as well directly. The projects which I mentioned. I think, let me try to explain why we do that, because I think Kuala Lumpur, Think City has done a wonderful job in Penang. If all of you have seen Georgetown, the transformation of Georgetown, that's basically due to the work of Hamdan and his team. It's a wonderful job. That formula can be replicated, which is what we want to do in Kuala Lumpur. We want to replicate that in Kuala Lumpur. Why? Because one is the value of culture and heritage. Secondly, it's also tourism. It's a function of tourism. And the more, if you are able to develop Kuala Lumpur, for example, just like Georgetown, you'll get more tourists. And you get more tourists, obviously the multiplier effect on the country is bigger. On the people on the ground is bigger. So that is something which we think a lot at Khazanah, because as I say, we have a dual mandate. It's not so much about the commercial returns. Don't get me wrong, commercial returns are very important to help us fund the nation building side. But however, it's all about balance, finding the right balance. So I don't know whether that explains your question, but hopefully gives some insight to the audience today.
Absolutely, Nash. It's all about that shared value decision-making when it boils down to it. Staying cognizant of time, I'm going to have to ask both Khalid and Nadiah so we could keep it a little crisper. Khalid, I want to ask you to dig a little deeper into enablers for trust and accountability across philanthropy, government, and civil society. Tell us a little bit more about this so that, of course, you have long-term community-led impact from Pantau Madani's perspective.
Right. Thank you. Trust is a big word, right? Trust is a big word. But I would say this, that it's such an important ingredient. And I think what sits behind trust is really transparency, right? Because I've seen many programs, especially from my vantage point, programs that have really worked well, programs that have really not worked well. And more often than not, the programs that have not really worked well boils down to a couple of reasons. One being, as I said, clear transparency. And I think coming back to Asif, the example that you shared where MIT came and said, look, we have this technological advantage, but we don't have the resources on the ground to actually do that. And you have the community engagements. In some programs where I've seen where both the teams then start working in silos, right, and connecting only on areas where they need to connect. But how do you ensure open transparency in these programs where data is shared across the program freely, outcomes are shared, and it's total openness. One good example, Puan Siti will remember, in program Anak Kita, when we started off, we said, look, we need to be led by data. And I will be the first one to put up from a government perspective, when you ask data from government, right, you go through hoops and loops and all sorts of things, right? But because we had this great partnership together and we said, no, we are committed to the outcome, and we don't get the right data and we are not transparent and we don't know exactly where this student is sitting, in which school, in which state, and needs the right intervention, we're not going to be changing lives here, right? And therefore, on set of that transparency, we build trust, and that's a very key ingredient. I think the second thing I would say is that this mission-led, purposeful alignment, it's so important, right? A lot of our programs today are sometimes a little bit haphazard. Again, I'll be the first one to put up and say, from a government perspective, right? You run a program here, you run a program there, and you are trying to resolve a problem here and a problem there. But how do you align across a mission that you want to achieve? And yesterday also I heard this Yuani shared that we have a lot of uncle and aunties, right? And we don't really have a parent, and that's because we're not really mission-led. If we are very, very focused on a particular mission that we want to achieve, then you bring everyone together, right? And so that, to me, is very, very important. And the third thing I would say is really, as I mentioned before, co-ownership, co-development, co-ownership, and co-accountability of the outcomes. Because when a program is being developed, you want to bring as many people to the table. You want to hear as many voices, especially the voices that are against the grain, those voices that are against you, those voices that are not aligned to you, the voices that sound different. Those voices, you want to really give them a table at the seat and listen to those voices, because those voices will effectively help you develop the right solutions and guide you to the right path. And not only voices that are very aligned to you and very familiar, try to bring in all the unfamiliar voices as well.
Absolutely, because that actually reduces the rate of project abandonment, and you want to make sure it's sustainable. Nadiah, perhaps just to perfectly end out this entire session, could you tell us a little more about what you, through your work, have actually learned about the types of leadership environments that actually enable unconventional leaders?
Maybe I'll start with a question. How many boards actually ask their CEOs if they're okay? Because I find that as managers, we ask our staff if they're okay, but I think boards in general kind of shy away from all this touchy-feely stuff. We assume that senior people have it figured out, or maybe we pay you enough to figure it out, and so you should be. But the problems that leaders face are complex, and the solutions more often than not, involve people. But then we try and implement change by having KPIs, and we assume that if we just tell the staff what to do, that they should, be incentivized and motivated to improve and do what we tell them to do. Instead of taking into account, back to being human-centered again, that it's messy being human, right? People have different intrinsic motivations. They operate in different environments, even office layouts. I remember one time in the hospital, we were just like, why is this admission so slow? And then when we really sat down and observed, we realized that the printers are actually located a bit far away for people to walk back and forth. And we changed the office environment. So I think like being intentional in managing people, not just assuming that, on-the-job training means you observe me and then you'll kind of figure out what needs to be done. That's actually really stressful for both the leader and the people reporting to them. So I think number one is being intentional about all this managing people and leaving things to chance the way we usually do. Second one is fear is a powerful motivator. It makes us not show up. It makes us not speak up. It makes us miss the chance to be at the table. I think it's really important to embrace that fear and give time to understand and live with that fear and make it productive, because fear can make you think that you're not good enough. But it's important because you need to recognize when you need help. And I'm speaking to many people, like after what had happened to me, many people reached out, and I realized that there are a lot of people who actually just don't have anyone to talk to. They don't have a sounding board. And what I realized is that actually burnout in particular is pervasive, but nobody wants to talk about it. And in that it looks different for different people. In my own experience, you have so much expectations on you and you have to lead. And a lot of times when we're facing challenges, what we do is we kind of default back to our basic programming. We kind of go back to what we think made us successful, and we think that if we do more of that, that will help us get over the challenge that we're facing now. But idiotically, what that meant for me was that I'm trying to work myself out of burnout, which obviously didn't really work. So I think it's really important at the end of the day for leaders to have actually the discipline and the space to do self-reflection and have a sounding board, whether it's within your organization or outside of your organization. Make time, because it's the touchy-feely things that make us human, and better humans make better leaders.
Thank you. Really well said. So clearly, the measure of our leadership is not how tightly we hold on to power, but how widely we open that circle. I'd like to, of course, end with a closing reflection upon our upcoming Hari Kebangsaan, Malaysian Independence Day, and then Hari Malaysia, Malaysia Day, all happening within the next 30 days. Celebrations will be held all over the country. But ladies and gentlemen, let us remember that real independence is independence from poverty, unemployment, hunger, malnutrition, lack of proper health care and good education, and of course, rising above every form of prejudice. It's been an honor and a pleasure. May I request a huge round of applause for our esteemed speakers today.